From South Bend, Indiana, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
I started to see a potential career path with it. I think, as with the first role that we had, it kind of, we had more of a technician type of role. So going to school for an engineer and getting a master's degree, being sort of the technician is what you initially assume the career path is. But then as you learn the applications and what you can do with it and all the other offshoots in the industry that are relevant to it, you start to learn all the other kind of career paths within that.
That was Jordan Weston. Jordan is now a full-time employee with the Additive Manufacturing Users Group conference, having previously spent a number of years supporting and leading AM efforts at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. He joins the show today to talk about his journey and what he's done in the additive manufacturing space. Before we get started, head over to www.3degreescompany.com and subscribe to the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the show anywhere you download your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or Stitcher. Also, if you or anyone in your company are looking for materials, qualification, or data management software support, reach out to the team through our website or via email at info@3degreescompany.com. All right, Jordan, thanks so much for joining the show today. I'm excited to hear your journey into additive. So for people who don't know you, maybe let's start at the beginning. So where were you born? What were some of those early interests that you had that kind of may have set some of the roots for what you're doing today?
Yeah. So thanks again for having me on here, and I'll start with a little background. So I'm from a small town in Wisconsin, about an hour northwest of the city of Milwaukee. As a kid, I was always interested in engineering and basically taking things apart and putting them back together. Sometimes not always putting them back together, but always had an interest in how things worked and building things. And after graduating high school, I attended Milwaukee School of Engineering and went for a program for biomedical engineering.
Do you remember any specific things you were taking apart, or like were you doing like different?
I specifically
Scouts,
remember
Boy
when I
Scout
couldn't get
stuff
back together. So I think probably when I was maybe 13, 14 years old, for some reason I decided to take apart my dad's weed trimmer and like disassembled the entire engine, took everything out, and wasn't able to get it back together. I don't know why I did it, but he was definitely not pleased with that. But I learned a lot about how engines worked and things like that. But that's one in particular that I remember as something that I really learned the most, but also sort of failed at getting it back together. So I realized I have to be a little careful with overconfidence as well.
And so you mentioned biomedical. Did you have a particular interest in kind of the medical space, or what kind of some of the, I guess, multidisciplinary nature of that degree? What was the draw there?
I did, yeah. So my mom was a nurse, so always kind of had an influence from the medical side. So that was always interesting as well. I would say if I didn't do biomedical, I probably would have done mechanical, but ended up making the decision to pursue biomedical.
Do you remember the first time you saw 3D printing?
It was at MSOE. It was our freshman year. We had part of our program was sort of a intro to the design process. So it was basically the freshman design course, I think it was called. And at a certain point, they introduced us to all of the resources available at the university. So they took us through the machine shop, and then we had an actual rapid prototyping center there, which students had access to, but mainly the primary function of the Rapid Prototyping Center at Milwaukee School of Engineering was actually to support businesses through a consortium and a kind of an educational, the how, the when, the where, the why to use additive manufacturing in a professional aspect. But as I said, the resources at the center were available to students. So that was where I was first introduced to it. And I definitely didn't understand it fully the first time I saw it, but ironically, I ended up working there later on in my undergraduate career there. So
So were you doing like a kind of work study type of thing, or was there a class that you kind of got involved with the rapid
yeah,
prototyping?
so it was called the position was called undergraduate research assistant. I had a good friend that was also going for biomedical engineering. He had started working there a few months before me, and I think this was probably my sophomore year that he had started working there towards the end of that. And as the summer break was approaching, I had seen that there was a few opportunities for undergraduate research assistant positions. Asked him about it, asked him, like what he thought of it, and he was very interested and did a very good job selling it for me. So put in an application there, ended up getting hired and started that summer between my sophomore and my junior year, and really, really learned a lot. So as I said, it is primarily set up to support a consortium of about 40 to 45 companies, many of them in the Milwaukee area, but some of them international. Some of the key companies in the Milwaukee area were Harley Davidson, Snap-on, Master-Lock, Kohler Company. So a lot of the Milwaukee Midwest companies. We also did a lot of work for Bombardier Recreational Products. Um, and it was a very kind of a unique setup. So it's a commercially viable center within a university. So it they covered their own cost through the paid professional work that was done. And almost it was kind of like the farm system for additive manufacturing experts. So they hired typically between 12 to 15 undergraduate and graduate students, trained them how to operate the machines as well as set up quote and set up parts for actually running the projects, post processing, finishing, quality control. So basically, from start to finish, the students were given the opportunity to basically see that whole process and actually interact with real customers, actual engineers and designers from these companies. So really really a hands-on kind of on the job training. So um, the students were divided into kind of process teams. So each one focused on different processes, a team of 4 or 5. Um, I started off with SLS or laser sintering, and eventually started kind of learning the other processes. At that time, we had SLS, we had stereolithography, SLA, we had an FDM machine from Stratasys, and we had at the time it was Z Corp, the binder jetting full color printer as well. So ended up working there for the through my undergraduate, so through my senior year, and then at the time actually a graduate position opened up as well, and decided to continue to stay at MSOE and pursue a master's degree, and spend a couple more years as a graduate student, graduate intern as well.
Awesome. Do you have a particular project you remember that you could talk about?
Definitely a lot of projects. Most of them we couldn't talk about because they were proprietary.
Yeah.
I would say some of the interesting ones, though, were, with my background in being biomedical, I really was attracted or drawn to the medical applications that we had done there. One of the projects that was ongoing through my entire career at Milwaukee School of Engineering, so a good 14 or 15 years, we did some pre-surgical planning models where they would take, we would end up getting the STL ready for print, but upstream from that, they would start with a CT scan. They would segment out the bone model, and they would put that onto a platform to kind of hold that or mount that in place. And then they would these were patients that were um, they had severe deterioration in their hips. Many of them already had a hip implant and continued to have deterioration. So these were kind of the next level from the standardized hip implant materials that are out there. So these were actual custom fit. So the role that we played is we printed the actual hip model that was segmented from the DICOM files from CT, and then they also designed the company, not MSOE, but they also designed the custom fit implants that basically would fit into that bone model that we would print. So we would eventually send those out, and those would go into the actual surgeon's hands. And they had a 3D printed model of the hip, and they had a 3D printed model of the what would eventually be the titanium implant. And they could do the basically the dry run of the surgery using these models, um, before having the patients on the operating table. So that was kind of one of those applications that really stuck with me. Like, wow, we're really doing something that is affecting and helping people. And it was kind of kind of a crazy process when you thought about it. When a model would come in, you would print them and ship them out in a couple of days, and they were very transparent with us, and when they needed that, because they would say something along the lines of, well, we have this surgery scheduled 2 weeks out from today, so we need these models now. So it was like you know a little high stakes. And I'm sure, as you're aware, um, these machines sometimes aren't the most reliable. So if something would break or go wrong, or a print crashed, it could be a little stressful. But also the impact that we had on this project was pretty that really resonated with me. Like, I felt like we were really doing something, really making a difference.
And did you have in your mind that you wanted to kind of make a career out of the technology at like additive manufacturing and kind of being in the seeing all the
It
stuff you were doing in the RP lab?
it probably took a few years before it finally clicked, where I started to see a potential career path with it. Um, I think, as with the first role that we had, it kind of we had more of a technician type of role. So going to school for an engineer and getting a master's degree, being being sort of the technician is what you initially assume the career path is, but then as you learn the applications and what you can do with it, and all the other offshoots in the industry that are relevant to it, you start to learn all the other kind of career paths within that. And that was eventually, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I ended up becoming operations manager of that center, and that was something that I really wanted to help our students, our undergraduate students, understand. Was there are plenty of careers in the additive manufacturing industry, and they're not just the sort of technician roles where you're constantly setting up a machine, breaking out parts, post processing, things like that. And I push to help them understand that their knowledge is extremely valuable in an industry that has grown so rapidly in the last decade, and that there's a huge need for people with that, 2, 3 years experience, that we were, graduating students with that experience. Huge need for that in the industry. So they were very, I felt it important to, if they wanted to pursue a career in that, help them understand where all their options lie.
Were there any common denominators for, I would say, people that were more successful than others, right? Was there like a certain skill set that if they had, you like, oh, these guys are going to do well, or mindset, or just personality type that like, hey, if you're new to the industry, right? Or if you're trying to work on your own career, like you've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of people go through the program, go through the lab at this point, get jobs in all sorts of different parts of the industry. What do you think sets kind of the top 5 or 10% apart?
It's definitely the mindset. I think, and especially once he started getting to the year 2013, 14, 15, where by the time you were dealing with students in that sort of time period, a lot of them had already had access to 3D printing in middle school, high school, as it became more available, and widespread in the years prior to that. And, also a lot of them had their own, um, like a Prusa or some of the lower cost 3D printers as well. That I think that they had that mindset and that passion of wanting to be hands-on with equipment, understand really how it works, how to troubleshoot things, how to solve problems with it. And then I think that mindset of learning on the lower cost sort of entry level machines and then giving someone an opportunity to apply that knowledge that they developed on their machine at home or at school, but do it on a $250,000 to a $500,000 machine. I think a lot of them really, were drawn to that. And those are the ones that, the ones that were very passionate about 3D printing or additive were the ones that very easily transitioned into the industry. So I can probably think of probably probably a few dozen that ended up graduating and going to OEMs, service bureaus, working at managing labs at the companies that they went to go work for. And a lot of them, still stay in touch with as well. And it's a pretty small industry, so you'll see them at events and trade shows and things like that. So,
And over that time, as you're kind of managing the lab there, what was changing with the companies in the consortium? Were you seeing different types of projects coming in or different questions that people were asking of you guys and evolving into their relationship with you?
yeah, that's a really, really good question. When I started, it was 2008, and that was kind of that time period where just producing a part was pretty valuable. Just having something in hand versus looking at a CAD model or a simulation or something like that. And as additive became more adopted by all the consortium members, you started seeing these members bring all these machines in house, especially the lower barrier to entry machines, such as the FDM or FFF, which can pretty easily sit in an office format and are very accessible to teams of engineers, or if they had a lab built out for things like that. Um, uh, the other processes that were more suitable for like a lab environment, like laser sintering with powder everywhere, um, uh, photopolymers with a lot of resins and chemicals for cleaning and post processing. Those were the ones that it sort of shifted towards um, the ones that were required in a lab environment were initially the ones that kind of stayed in house, and then as the uh, lower barrier to entry ones were adopted by them, we kind of saw that drop a little bit until you started getting into um, higher requirements, better mechanical properties than something a lower cost machine could do. Um, uh, Higher temperature materials, right, like the Ultems or the Peaks, things like that. So eventually, just it definitely evolved from just a prototype or a concept into more of a requirement that it has, functional or more aesthetic, or even towards really along the whole time we started getting into developing not just prototypes but pathways for using additive for production. And it was a lot of times it was very niche production applications where it just made sense, where it was the right volumes, the right size, the right factors that justified using additive versus other traditional manufacturing techniques.
Yep. And along that time, I mean, there'll be a thread of AMUG in there. When did you hear about AMUG? What was your first kind of interaction? Or maybe for those who don't know about it, maybe let's just start. What is AMUG?
Sure, sure. So AMUG is who I'm currently working with, but it's the Additive Manufacturing Users Group. Um, it's been it's been around since basically the inception of additive manufacturing. It started as a 3D Systems user group, and initially it was for owners and operators of 3D Systems machines. That was probably well before my time in the industry. Is I think the late '80s or early '90s. Um, uh, a group of users would meet annually to discuss applications, troubleshootings, problem solvings, kind of sharing the thorns and roses with the technology with each other. That has since grown to being open to all users of the industry. So it shifted or pivoted away from only 3D systems equipment to being open to all technologies, polymers and metals, um, as well as other, ceramics and other processes of additives. So a very agnostic, technology agnostic user group now. I first went there in, I believe it was 2012, and it was either the first or the second year where they pivoted and they did open it up to the rest of the industry. And my boss at the time, my manager at the time, had offered to attend this conference and user group meeting, and he's like, "You can go if you'd like, but if you're going to travel to a conference, you're going to present, so you better start thinking of something that you want to share." So, the very first year of attending AMUG, again, it was 2012, was thrown into the mix, and I gave a 30-minute presentation on our processes at MSOE for recycling SLS nylon 12 materials. So
Was that Costa
um,
Mesa? Was that the?
it was Costa
I
Mesa.
think that
Yep.
was my first one. That's probably where we met. I probably
I
went to
think
your.
it is.
I
Yeah.
probably went to your talk.
Yeah.
'Cause I was doing
Did you
SLS
enter
stuff
in were you in the technical competition that year as well?
with
I think
John
that's what I
Cross at
remember
Burton
meeting.
with
Yeah, exactly, Burton.
the
Yeah.
binding.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny too, because at that time, this was sort of coinciding with the growth of the industry. I think there was probably 250 people
Mhm.
that had attended that year, and everybody was just talking about the amazing growth. I think it grew 60% that year. So the previous year it was 100 and something, and then that year it was 250, and then it continued to grow, 40 to 60, 70% year over year. So in the time of my first year attending to, towards um, the 2018, 2019, it grew from like 250 people to like 2,000 people that had attended. So it evolved quite a bit during that time as well. So first year presented. I think the second and third year I also presented, and eventually someone had asked me, "Would you like to volunteer and contribute more to the organization?" So one thing to note for those who aren't familiar with Additive Manufacturing User Group is primarily it's run by a volunteer board of directors, so it's a working board of directors, and several committees with volunteer members of those committees. And I was given the opportunity to be on the track leader committee, and I think it was just called track leaders at that time. But essentially, the responsibility was to help recruit speakers for that particular track. And as my background was SLS or laser sintering, primarily, I was asked to be the track leader for the laser sintering track. So I think for another 1 or 2 years, I would reach out and recruit people to speak on all things laser sintering, and eventually that turned into it was sort of consolidated into a few other tracks. Eventually became the education and training track, and I ran that for a couple of years, and eventually uh, I kind of threw my hat in the ring to run for a board of directors position, and in I believe it was 2021, there's a position called Director of Education and Conference, which primarily oversees a lot of the content and the agenda, works with a lot of the track leaders, has a bit of oversight on the keynote speakers and all the morning sessions and things like that, as well as other educational components of the conference. So we had offered tours for attendees to go tour local companies. We had offered free conference training, certification courses, through working with ASTM and SME and UL for courses like that. So, yeah, it all started with 2012 and basically saying, if you want to go to this, you need to present, and just kind of year over year, it sort of escalated into becoming more and more involved with it.
That's awesome. And so,
Yeah.
what is your kind of current role there?
So I just started a new role. It was around 7 or 8 months ago. I started in June of 2023, and as I mentioned earlier, AMUG had first most of its history had primarily been run by volunteer board and a group of volunteer committees, and over time, as the growth of that conference happened from a 200 person to a 2,000 person conference, they started bringing in some outside help, contractors, vendors, things like that. So Eventually it started pivoting towards having paid, not quite employees, but paid vendors and contractors managing specific kind of operational roles within the organization. And then eventually, eventually the board of directors decided to bring on an actual employee. Over the last few years, that was sort of developed into a role. The role is called operations manager, and that primary responsibility of that is to kind of manage the vendors and the contractors, as well as keep a lot of the volunteer committees on track and on schedule. Through the course of a year, there's a lot of things that have to happen. A lot of the primary planning starts, a few months after the conference, and then things start to escalate, and then they eventually peak a few months before the conference, and then it happens, and it kind of cycles and repeats. So, the concept of the operations manager was to make sure things are happening on time, on schedule, as well as manage the vendors, contractors, the contracts that they have with the organization, as well as keep them on track. So you can understand or think about if as that grew and you started bringing on contractors and then volunteers, so you have contractors reporting to volunteers and some contractors reporting to other contractors, and the employee role was kind of created to centralize that and sort of funnel a lot of these branches into one primary point of contact. So I was interested in that role when it was developed and applied for it, and was hired in June of 2023 as AMUG's first and still only employee. So it was kind of an exciting opportunity, and definitely have been enjoying it so far.
And you want to talk a little bit about kind of registration is still open. So, I mean, what's kind of coming up this year for AMUG is back in Chicago, and I want to give a little preview of kind of what you've been working on, what kind of the new stuff that's coming out.
Sure. So registration is still open. The conference is in Chicago at the Chicago Hilton. We've held that there a few times in the past. It is going to be March 10th through 14th. So it starts Sunday evening with some activities, and then the keynotes and presentations will be that Monday through Thursday. We are just about to release a agenda for the full agenda for the whole week. There are a lot of sessions, probably close to 200 or so sessions that our track leader committees and our sponsors have put together. So very excited for that. One of the differentiators of AMUG is it's really built around networking and learning. So it's not a conference where you attend, keynote and go to a few breakouts and then, go to meet with a colleague and go get dinner at some restaurant outside of the conference. It's really built to keep everybody under the same roof the entire time. So it's sort of an all-inclusive package. So, when you register for AMUG, you are signing up for Sunday night through Thursday afternoon. And it's also including food and beverage through the entire week. So that's very different from other conferences, both within the industry and
you don't go
elsewhere.
hungry for anyone who's
You will not go
been.
hungry at AMUG. No, exactly. So, but again, it's set up like that to promote networking, interactions, meeting new people, discussing, what's working with additive, what's not working, how do we continue moving this forward and develop these applications. So every evening has some networking events scheduled. The first few evenings will be Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night will be the AMUG Expo, where our sponsors and exhibitors will have kind of a expo trade fair. I won't say trade show, but expo vendor fair kind of thing set up. And the following evenings we'll have there will be a special event and dinner, which will be an offsite event. There will be the final night then would be a networking event. Typically they'll do like a casino night and just things to kind of promote promote meeting new people, networking activities, things like that. So
Yeah.
it's you will not, as you said, you will not go hungry, and you will be exhausted at the conclusion of the event.
Yeah, that's for sure. Um, yeah, it's always been something. I mean, I think I've only missed one maybe in that since 2012, and I think we had have a different perspective in the sense that kind of start as going as a student presenting, kind of getting a booth eventually, and kind of being on the expo side, and so it's always excited that now this year it's instead of 2 nights, 3 nights of the expo and getting to meet everyone that's
Hmm.
there, and so it's a certainly recommend it in terms of um, a unique experience with an additive, and people are often more forthcoming. Whether that's on the realities of additive, right? And how you can work together. So that's awesome. I guess when as you've kind of flipped into the an even more broader role in terms of seeing the additive industry. Like what are you excited about going into 2024? Maybe not AMUG related, but like you see it and interact with a lot of companies, right? Like there's been a lot of changes in the last 6 months with different companies and different technologies. But what kind of keeps you excited about what you're seeing and some of the new news and new features that people are talking about?
I think you know, we're kind of going through a period of a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and I think that that's kind of exciting as we sort of start to narrow the focus on what the applications, the specific applications are for each process and each technology. That's one of the things too that really has evolved over the last decade or so is, you know, when I started, everybody had a machine that they claimed could do everything. And it's the kind of if you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Um, Whereas I think we're really starting to see the applications drive the processes instead of the processes trying to drive the applications. So seeing a lot of kind of narrowing down of that focus on, sort of each machine or each process is a specific tool in that toolbox. And there's still quite a bit of innovation that we're seeing in the industry. One of the I'll jump back to my career at MSOE. One of the things that we also did was provided a beta testing site for new technologies in the industry. So we um, would beta test new materials, new processes from companies like Stratasys, 3D Systems. We had beta tested the carbon DLS system very early when they had launched that. I think we were one of the first companies or one of the first locations or facilities to bring in that technology when it was new. Um, right when I was transitioning out of MSOE, we brought in a extra 3D printer, which I thought was really interesting because it was very different, very game changing from what you had seen as far as innovations in the photopolymer industry. So, for those who aren't familiar with that, instead of being either or laser or um, uh, DLP process, it actually combines both so that you can get the benefits of the speed of DLP, but the accuracy of a laser system. And don't want to make it sound like a product pitch for them, but that was definitely something I was very excited to see. And one of the things I was sad to leave behind because I think that there were a lot of cool applications that could be done with that. And they're not the only ones. There's a lot of other companies that are still kind of pushing limits and what these processes can do, and they're continuing to evolve. And again, I think it comes down to applications and you know, each technology evolving into being a specific tool for a specific application rather than a one size fits all. So,
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm excited for it, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff coming down the way. So, last question, more of a fun question. Uh, what's a book or piece of literature or something that's kind of inspired you over your career that you kind of either return to or kind of gain some knowledge from that you would like to share with the audience?
okay, you may stump me on that. Admittedly, I don't read very much. Um,
Could be a podcast, could be something else. Yeah.
yeah,
Anything.
yeah, yeah. I think I I definitely like to um, read about, you know, kind of not necessarily like the length of a book, but smaller pieces of literature or I don't want to say press releases, but just I like to see what is new day to day in the industry actually. So I have a couple bookmarks of on my browser for some of the bigger media companies within the additive industry, and I definitely check in on that very often to kind of see what's happening, what's new, and that when I see that and then attend events like AMUG or other additive conferences. Something that catches my interest on those press releases, I immediately go to check those out and start asking questions to see if you can kind of filter out the noise from reality. So that's probably the best answer I could come up with for that question. So
Right on.
yeah,
Cool. Well, Jordan, thanks so much for sharing your story. I look forward to seeing you at AMUG. And for anyone who's interested, it's what, amug.com or Additive Manufacturing Users Group.com for
amug.com.
registration. Yep.
Yep.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Cool. We'll see you in 5, 6 weeks.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here and looking forward to seeing you.